Hey there, dirt bike people. I'm Chuck from TrueTech, and today I'm going to give you my first initial thoughts after riding this bike for the first time. So first off, I wasn't expecting to do a ride review so quickly. I was planning to get my shop cleaned up today, and I needed to get these Koves out of the crates and rolling in order to do that. As I was finishing up though, my wife walked in the door and asked if I wanted to go for a ride with the kids this evening. So here we are. It was actually a perfect opportunity for a break-in test ride. After spending a few hours on the bike now, I realized that this bike is not at all what I thought it would be. The suspension, chassis, and engine all surprised me in totally different ways. I was expecting this bike to be part of the enduro category, similar to the 450L or RL and the 500 EXCF and the other Austrian 500s. As soon as I got on the bike, I realized this power isn't even close to either one of those bikes. If we're putting it in the enduro category, simply put, this thing is a slug. I was expecting this to be a wheelie machine, but it's actually hard to get it up in third. The power is so weak that it's a bit of a chore to do a second gear wheelie on the road. I can do it in third if I really try, but the power is simply much weaker than I was expecting. Don't worry, this isn't the end of the review, so we'll come back to the power later. Backing up a little bit. The first thing I actually noticed about the bike as I was rolling down my driveway is that the chassis felt a lot like a KTM 690. It feels front end heavy and the rear feels high. That might be because I filled both front fuel tanks up right away, but I've got a feeling it's a bit stink buggy. This was reinforced later on the trail. After following the kids for a while, I went off on my own for a bit to see what the bike feels like in the woods. Now keep in mind that I'm coming to this Kove as an enduro rider and not an ADV rider. Compared to a T7 or an 890, this thing feels light, but compared to a 450L or a 500, it's a pig. The front end was immediately twitchy in the single track. That front end weight bias caused it to oversteer and tuck in corners, and the tall gearing paired with the lack of power meant that I was in first gear where I would normally be in third gear on my 300. This front end twitchiness isn't foreign to me. Most adventure bikes are way worse than this one. The KLR 650 is the worst I've ever felt, but the T7 and the KTM adventure bikes, the Desert X, the Touareg are all much worse than this. It feels like the rake and trail are off. I think I can adjust this with springs and sag, but I'll have to get some more numbers before I know exactly what needs to be done. Other than the front to rear bias, the suspension is really good in the woods. I've heard a lot of ADV riders find it very stiff and racy, and that makes sense coming from a dual sport rider's perspective. But for an average enduro rider, the suspension is plush enough and holds up well enough to ride aggressively. It is by far the best stock ADV suspension I've ever ridden. If I had a T7 or an 890, I would want the suspension set up very much like this, just with the front end bias taken care of. The suspension on the Kove is better than any ADV bike on the market, but it's worse than any dirt bike on the market. This bike is very unique. When I ride most adventure bikes, I find them undersprung and undervalved to the point where I believe they are legitimately unsafe because the forks dive so badly that the rider has a hard time controlling the bike under heavy braking or in off-road corners. This bike is not like that. What I realized is that my preconceived idea about the category this bike is in is absolutely wrong. This is an adventure bike. It feels like an adventure bike. It's not a powerful adventure bike, but it's not slow either. It's got enough power. This bike feels like a 300 Rally on steroids. It's heavier than the 300 Rally, but the suspension is way better, and it has way more power. It also carries a huge amount of fuel, which is a game changer. This bike might truly be the best of both worlds. I hate riding my dirt bike on forest service roads. It's just uncomfortable. This bike is comfortable enough to ride forest service roads and capable enough to ride single track and enjoy it. Personally, I'm not one of those guys that thinks an 890 is great for riding single track. Frankly, I think it's kind of silly. If you have to ride some single track to connect roads, I know it can be done, but I have no interest in seeing how small a trail I can squeeze a bus through. This bike really threads the needle between being a good dirt bike and a good adventure bike. I'm gonna have this bike around for quite a while, and I'm really looking forward to doing a type of riding that I don't normally do. I plan on doing some day trips where we put on a few 100 kilometers of forest service roads, and we also find some cool new places that we wouldn't be able to find on our dirt bikes. Of course, I hope to be making some changes to it and learning more about it from both a mechanical and a rideability perspective. And whatever happens with this thing, you can be sure that I'll be sharing my findings things with you guys. If you're interested in following my adventure with this Kove 450, please go ahead and subscribe. If you want more frequent updates, follow me on Instagram. And if you have questions or comments, leave them down below or message me directly. Thanks for watching.